Hi guys, welcome back to the Social Tune and a brand new episode of Record Roundup. And this week is pure catch-up. I've been behind on my schedule for a number of weeks now due to multiple family visits, so when I saw that there were no new albums that I wanted to review this week, outside of maybe that new Andrew WK record, might as well take the opportunity and get my thoughts on these 5 albums out there so I can finally get back on track. So might as well start off with one that won't require too much effort.
Go. When I see your light shine, I know I'm home. When I see your light shine, I know I'm home.
So if you would all cast your minds back about a year or so, you may remember a certain dashing music critic making a list of the most underrated hits of 2015. And in that video, one of the songs highlighted was Riptide by the underground indie band Vance Joy. Now, to many of us, that song is a source of nostalgia reminiscent of gentle summer breezes. But since then, I've discovered there is a subsection of critics who hate this band, calling them the quintessential white guy with acoustic guitar group led by a frontman who can't sing to save his life. And honestly, I have to disagree with that. Sure, they were nothing special, but as a mostly acoustic and fairly charming indie rock band, they were pretty entertaining. And this album has much the same feel to it. I get the feeling that Vance Joy took a sidewards glance at a lot of the criticism their last project got and decided to invest a bit more in the production this time around, as it feels much fuller with horns and pianos thrown in there that don't sound bad at all. Heck, there are even pseudo-gothic backing vocals in the vein of a band like Bastille on some of these songs that do give them some extra flavor. Okay, it's nothing grandiose, but it does add some texture to what could have been a lot plainer. And as for the songwriting, while again it's nothing special, it's colourful enough to be passable. Their songwriting is nowhere near as interesting as, say, an Ed Sheeran, but it's also nowhere near as god-awful as some people have claimed. They're a very strange mix of self-reflection and flagellation, combined with love songs about how him and this girl belong together. Yes, it's simple, yes, it's cheesy, and yes, it is a little presumptuous at times, but I wouldn't say that any of it is remotely offensive. The only songs that really did rub me the wrong way were I'm With You and One of These Days, where it seems that he is fully convinced that this girl will fall in love with him eventually, whether she likes it or not. But apart from that, again, these songs are perfectly inoffensive. And I'll say it again, the enhanced production makes the album a lot more enjoyable than it could have been. So ultimately, I'm gonna give it a solid 6 out of 10 because I can definitely see people gravitating towards this. True, his voice is an acquired taste and will either make or break this album for you, but aside from a couple of moments here and there, this is perfectly fine. Check it out if you're curious. So here's an indie rock band that has been getting a fair amount of attention these past few weeks. Funny thing though, even though I and many other people only seem to have discovered them recently, they've actually been around for ages, as this is their 7th studio album. It's also one of their most critically acclaimed projects in years, so I was genuinely curious to dive into it. And first of all, let me say that I can absolutely see why this would appeal to a broader audience, as it's easily one of the band's catchiest to date, possibly most of all. However, personally, I can't really say that I'm absolutely head over heels for it. If only because the catchiness seems to come at the cost of the more intimate writing of some of their past projects. Not bad by any means, but missing a certain edge that characterized the screaming females at their most cutting. And to be fair to the band here, you could argue that that's exactly the point, as this is the album where they dive into their success as musicians, allowing the audience to peek behind the curtain to find out just how damaging it can be. Oh, there are still relationship songs about tearing apart former lovers, but often the reason the breakup occurred in the first place was because her fame became too much for him on songs like I'll Make You Sorry, while songs like Glass House are a little bit more direct and offensive, referencing how everything they do is under scrutiny so that even fighting back can be really difficult. Or take a song like Soft Dominion, which highlights the pressure they feel to constantly top themselves and meet both their fans' expectations as well as their own. And a lot of the time, all the pressure that appears appears on a project like this can make for a very claustrophobic and uncomfortable listen. That is, if it wasn't for Marissa Paternoster's fantastic vocal performance as well as the strong hooks. Now, to be blunt, I do kind of miss the moments where she would get just a little bit more personal, like on their 2012 album Ugly, but she still has a ton of natural charisma that does automatically draw you in. And again, in terms of catchiness, you will get some fantastic hooks here on songs like Glass House, Bird in Space, and especially I'll Make You Sorry, which does kind of make up for the fact that the emotional writing and stakes on this album do kind of take a backseat to something that is a bit more focused but less relatable. So for me, this is getting a very strong 7 out of 10. Not quite my favorite album of theirs, but still very enjoyable. And if you're looking to get into this band, it's an easy entry point for anyone. So definitely give it a listen and see for yourself. So I would never have even heard of this album if it weren't for one of you guys reaching out to me and a bunch of other music critics on Twitter in order to review it. And since I didn't have much else lined up, I thought, why not, and sought it out. And after multiple listens, I can kind of see why people would be reluctant to talk about this, because it's weird. A blend of indie folk and pop with some punk rock touches thrown in there, and diving into, well, Caroline's life on her own as a loner. And in many ways, it's ugly and unrefined, with distorted vocals, tinny synths, and even the guitars sounding extremely raw, or in the case of songs like Money, like they were just thrown into a meat grinder. And yet, for some reason, it just works. After just a few listens, I was completely drawn in by this album. It's really enjoyable. And I'll admit, a lot of that once again has to do with these hooks, which are extremely catchy on almost every single song here. From the driving bass and that one-word chorus that conveys so much on Cry, to the mean bassline, distorted shrieking and tumultuous drums of Money, to the ascending keys and shimmering strings on the closer Animal, to the more synth-pop inspired Getting to Me with the echoing backing vocals. And unlike on All at Once, the lyrics here are raw, direct, and painfully relatable. Basically, this is Caroline Rose's own view on life, where she pulls no punches, with a cool, disaffected attitude which is extremely appealing but is also clearly just a facade, as the cracks appear all across this album from beginning to end. I love the balance in her delivery here, and she handles it expertly. Take Cry, where she bitterly acknowledges that in this life, no matter how old you get, crying is inevitable and it's perfectly natural. Or a song like Getting to Me, where she's looking around jealously at all the happy couples together while she's alone, a gay woman who is searching for company in a predominantly straight neighborhood. Or take a song like Animal, which deals with making love to someone when you're still hung up on someone else, how difficult that can be. Of course, the personal songs aren't the only ones that she handles well, as Caroline Rose is a punk girl through and through. Thus you get songs like the interlude Smile, where she runs through all of the people who told her to smile in her life. After all, why should she smile if she doesn't feel like it? Or to be even more direct, take a song like Bikini, which handles how the easiest way for a woman to be successful in any business is to objectify herself. Which is exactly the point where coming from a high and mighty position may come across as catty or bitchy, but instead she shows us that she clearly is no saint on songs like Money, where she fully admits that a lot of the decisions that she made in her life were made purely for the money, not for art or love. Because after all, as much as people will tell you otherwise, we all need money in order to survive. But my absolute favorite song on this album is Jeannie Becomes a Mom, which shows a girl who was ready to take on the world and go far, but is stopped dead in her tracks when she gets pregnant and has to give birth to a baby, a new life that she is now responsible for, despite being the furthest thing from a natural mother. After all, sometimes life is just gonna throw you a curveball and you just have to deal with it. And honestly, I'm actually grateful that the song didn't show us that moment where she realizes just how important the baby is to her. Because even though that's implied, it's not the main point of the song, which is basically that even if you have plans, life is going to surprise you, and when it does, it's not going to wait for you to catch your breath before continuing. And honestly, with every passing listen, every single song clicks for me more and more. If I had to pick a least favorite, it would probably be Talk, if only because To Die Today did the paranoid reflection on life so much more potently and with better production. But ultimately, that is not detracting from an album that is wildly enjoyable and that many people won't appreciate. For me, it's a solid 8 out of 10, definitely glad that I checked this out. If you're a fan of, say, Hayley Williams of Paramore but sometimes wish she would get just a little bit more manic, this comes highly recommended. Music that is catchy, slightly off the wall, and delivered with a ton of energy with nothing held back. Caroline Rose definitely deserves more attention, so go support her, starting by checking out this new album, Loner. Trust me, you won't regret it. And speaking of regrets, I was tempted to do a full review on this one, but I ultimately couldn't come up with enough to say, so here goes, I guess. So, why do people care about 6ix9ine, the hot rapper around at the moment who in no way resembles Lil Pump? He has had 2 kind of hits so far with both KEKE and Gummo, both of which had him screaming at his audience in a way that makes him interesting to someone, I suppose. And look, while I will try to remain professional and unbiased in this video, the fact that the first thing that I found out about this guy was that he had pled guilty to the charge of performing sexual acts with a minor kind of tainted his music for me right out the gate. Of course, it didn't help that his first big hit, Gummo, was atrocious, with incredibly confused production, an unpleasant delivery, and lyrics that were trying so hard to be shocking. I was listening to Eminem long before you came around, you little piece of shit, and while many of you wanted me to review this, I wasn't sure that I'd be able to say much. I mean, it's only 11 tracks long, one of those tracks just being Gummo again with an extra verse, and the entire runtime of the mixtape was only 27 minutes. But anyway, I listened to it multiple times. What did I think? Well, I'll give it this. I have heard worse this past year. Unlike the latest releases by Macklemore or Machine Gun Kelly, this wasn't exactly a chore to get through. And it wasn't quite as laughably incompetent as an album like Teenage Emotions by Lil Yachty, but it's still pretty awful, the more bland, boring type of awful that is nowhere near as much fun to talk about. The mixtape actually starts off okay with Billy, which is mercifully short and has an almost gothic swell to its main beat that does match 6ix9ine's delivery. And I won't deny that the hook blending the sound of gunshots with the shouts of shots did remind me of a crunk anthem on speed. Or take a song like KEKE with both Fetty Wap and A Boogie with the Hoodie completely stealing the show and actually making the song tolerable. Unfortunately, once you take a closer look, you quickly realize that the production is one of the least consistent parts of this album, because on the majority of the songs, the mixing and mastering is woefully incompetent. Take Dewey with the swamping bass clashing horrifically with the plinking distorted beat, where 6ix9ine seems to give up halfway through and then falls off the meter altogether. Oh, but it gets worse, like on 93, which is possibly one of the ugliest songs that I have heard in the past 3 years, where every single element seems to be fighting for dominance and all right at the front of the mix. And that doesn't sound edgy, it's ungodly messy and painfully amateurish. Similar case on Bubba, with its plinking atonal beat being drowned out by the bass, before switching to a cleaner beat in its last few seconds that honestly wasn't that bad. Why did you do that throughout the whole thing? Unfortunately, it transitions into Mookie, which takes all the screaming, obnoxious aggression of the previous tracks and multi-tracks it, which obviously serves to completely drown out the main instrumental. And then of course you have Gummo with its minimalistic tapping beat and the hi-hats, along with that piercing whistle that persists throughout the entire thing, and the second version topped off with Offset delivering one of the laziest verses of his entire career. And speaking of disappointing guests, you have Rondo, with the air horns, the off-kilter beat, and Tory Lanez auto-tuned chorus sounding unbelievably sloppy, only slightly redeemed by Young Thug, who thankfully did stick in his more energetic register. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, the mixtape ends with CHOCOLATÉ, ending with the messiest and ugliest beat on the entire record, with more elements than ever fighting for dominance and none of them meshing together. And after listening to it so many times, times, especially paired with some of the other albums that I had to review this week, it just soured on me more and more. The lyrics are all about killing people, gangbanging your girl, and none of it is fun. And 6ix9ine himself has energy, but that's about it. And ultimately, despite what I said before, while it's not quite as difficult to get through as a lot of the other projects that I have reviewed on this channel, the only reason for that is that it's mercifully short and has one or two good guests. So basically, strong 2 out of 10, barely trying, barely a project, and not worth your time. But I'm not surprised or shocked by that, and let's be honest, neither are you. We all knew how awful this was gonna be, and at this point, it's not even worth getting angry at. I mean, at the very least, he's not trying to justify his actions like AJR or Kodak Black, but yeah, it's still awful, boring, and by far the worst thing that I've heard so far in 2018. Ignore this project unless you're morbidly curious, and even then, go listen to something better.
I've been Wendy, living with the Lost Boys. You spent as a decade on the convoy, moves every night to prove we were something. Got confused if it was from a tool that we were running. I've seen Gibraltar, I've seen the Taj Mahal, Soweto, Hagia Sophia, Chef Shaolin paints the walls blue. I've played to full rooms, I've played the full two, burning through the bottoms of a pair of new boots.
So, after that unpleasantness, let's focus on a rapper who actually deserves the attention, Dessa. Those of you who do know her probably do for one of two reasons. She handled the cover of Congratulations on the Hamilton mixtape a couple of years back, and of course she's part of the Doomtree camp. The latter reason is how I personally know her, as this group has been praised many times before on this channel for their incredibly consistent quality. And while I really can't wait for them to all get together again to create a new project as a group, in the meantime, this will do me just fine. After all, to many, Dessa is the best rapper out of all of them, with a phenomenal solo discography and a knack for poetry and wisdom that shows off just what a prodigy she is. I mean, her album A Badly Broken Code is among the best albums of the decade, and I consider her song The Bullpen to be one of the most quintessential rap songs of all time. So yeah, you had better believe that I was excited about this. And this is a tricky release to talk about. One of those albums where the overall message is clear and Dessa clearly is putting her all into it, bringing production that blends hip-hop and art pop with both organic and electronic instrumentation, which definitely makes for an incredibly potent and experimental listen, but it's also one of those albums that unfortunately works better in pieces than as a whole. Because while the highs on this album are absolutely transcendent, the lows are unfortunately more noticeable than usual. And I'll be blunt, a big part of that does lie in the production. Because when it clicks, it's incredible. From the reverb effect and the cinematic Hans Zimmer-esque bass on 5 out of 6, to the swell of strings and bells on Velodrome, to the swell of mournful vocals paired with the heartbreaking piano line on Say When, to the banjo that accompanies the beat on Fire Drills, before the staccato strings come in to accentuate that bridge. These are all fantastic compositions and are backed up by strong hooks. On the other side of the spectrum though, you have Good Grief, with a listless hook and a tropical house beat that I could have heard on any radio hit, with a vibe that reminded me of a miserable mainstream hit in the vein of Bad Things if it weren't as punchable, or the bass and the skittering scratching on Half of You that was just a little bit too atonal on that hook, or the popping beat, the constant repetition, and the oohing on the hook of Jump Rope. That honestly just kind of served to annoy me a little. Although to be fair, nowhere near as much as Shrimp, where the Vocaloid beat really did get to me. And I guess that I should be grateful that that last song was as short as it was, but even the ending was really sloppy and sudden. And look, none of it is bad, but when it comes to Dessa, I've come to expect more than not bad. And the frustrating thing is, the content is so intriguing. This is one of those projects where the overarching theme is great, but the execution fails in certain spots. The album as a whole deals with Dessa's loneliness as someone going for the top, both in her work and her social life. After all, finding a partner who can match you can be very tough, especially when you're as talented and insightful as she is. It's similar to what Lorde was discussing on Liability last year, which can only be a good thing. And not only that, but she's exploring her place in hip-hop and the world in general as a woman. And while none of it quite reaches the heights of The Bullpen, it's still really potent. Across this album on songs like ride, jump rope, and especially fire drills, she dives into how girls are conditioned to handle the world a certain way. Told to stay safe rather than take risks, something that Dessa is wholeheartedly against. And being in that position is what inspires her to take down everyone who crosses her. From the phoenix rising from the ash metaphor on 5 out of 6, to training hard to making her work as natural and effortless as possible on Velodrome. But that mindset can have consequences, driving away lovers and friends alike until she's left sad and alone on Say When. A song that shows her stubbornly refusing to say when to either the bartender who's pouring her drink or the people asking when she's going to stop working so hard. That is powerful stuff, and as you can tell, the idea behind this album is so compelling. However, the execution is still a little bit botched, and while the best songs here are still phenomenal, the weaker songs unfortunately do stick out more because of it. Which wouldn't be so bad if the blander songs weren't all bunched up right in the middle, meaning you have a really strong beginning and an end, but a period in the middle where you're just waiting for it to get started again. Again, there's no song on this album that I would precisely call bad, but it does still serve to make it a fairly uneven listen. So ultimately, I'm going with an extremely strong 7 out of 10, but I'm still recommending that you all check this out because trust me, the best songs here are well worth your time. I still have complete faith in Dessa, and I really do hope that her next project will hit me a little bit harder, but as it is, it's still really good and downright amazing in spots. So give it a listen and see if it works for you. So thank you guys for watching, leave a like if you enjoyed. Yes, I know, these reviews are a little bit late, but again, at least I'm finally back on track now. And thus, if there are any more albums that you'd like me to review in future, then please post them in the comments or tweet them at me at @thesocialtune, link in the description. And while you're down there, let me know what you thought of these projects, I'm curious to hear your feedback. In the meantime, please subscribe so you don't miss a thing, and until the next time, I'm Finn, and this is The Social Tune, signing off.